We are now coming up on a very exciting session. I've been waiting for this one all day because we have a wonderful guest, a great teacher here to talk to you about the MCAT. In fact, we've roped the Senior Director of MCAT Programs in to talk to you about this. No, actually, he insisted. He really wanted to talk to you guys. And so there should be a, introduction. I want to set expectations here. No matter how good Petros is, and Petros is real good, 1 hour ain't going to be enough to get you ready for that MCAT, right? So this will be a good introduction of the steps you need to take in order to get ready. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Senior Director of MCAT Programs, great teacher, and good friend, Petros Manassi.
Thanks, Jed. And yes, good friend, good colleague, all the things. And welcome to each and every one of you to what hopefully will be a pretty fun hour, but at the same time, an informative hour talking about all things MCAT related that we can talk about in an hour. The session was advertised, it was listed as Jumpstart Your MCAT, the top 5 things to know. But as we were kind of putting this together, I was like, no, there aren't 5 things to know, at least for this hour. There's 6 things to know. So we're gonna do 1 extra. We're gonna +1 this as far as this time is concerned. As has been the theme here today, there's a long journey to get into medical school, to get out of medical school, post residency even, there's kind of lifelong learning that will continue. So this is really, designed as far as this next hour to focus on the MCAT, but lots of stuff that we talk about in here is going to be applicable to you as you kind of move forward through this process and then through the processes as you move forward in your career. So really, ask the questions that you have, think differently about, how you've been thinking about the MCAT, how you've been thinking about this whole process, and really, kind of start thinking to yourself, how can I use this tomorrow? How can I use this tonight? How can I start to make changes, especially those of you that are planning on testing in the next couple of months and are going to be kind of going through this process as we go through. I always start with this question very specifically because we sometimes lose sight of the reasons why we do the things that we do. And as an MCAT teacher, as somebody who's been kind of in the pre-med world for a very, very long time, it's important for you to remember the real reason why you're here at pre-med day, the real reason why you're going to study your heart out for your pre-med classes and study for the MCAT and make sure that your application is presenting you the way that you want your application to present you, is because you really want to be here. This is a white coat ceremony. This is, week 1 of medical school. You can tell that it's week 1 because everybody is smiling in the picture. They've gotten in, they've gotten their white coats. The white coat ceremony is this transition ceremony where students are welcomed into the medical profession by their professors and by the academic community at the school that they're at. Everyone's smiling. They haven't really started the hard work yet, right? They're in. But at the same time, the hard work is about to become. This is the ultimate goal, right? The ultimate goal isn't, oh, I'm going to just get into med school. The ultimate goal is to be here at the white coat ceremony. The ultimate goal is to be at the graduation. The ultimate goal is to have that lifelong career in medicine. And you're going to have lots of obstacles along the way. And I say this not to put a downer on things. I say this just as a reality. There's always going to be obstacles. Nothing is ever going to go perfectly as planned. But you have to remind yourself that the real reason, the real goal is always going to be about wearing the white coat and serving your patients and serving your community. So, you keep that mindset in place and you think about, okay, yes, I need to know that force equals mass times acceleration. That is an important scientific fact that will come to help me later on in life. But it's not about just knowing that force equals mass times acceleration. It's about knowing that this is how you're going to be applying your force. This is how you're going to be applying your energy into the world. So we've organized this really as 6 different myths. And the reality is there are more myths that we're going to kind of, there's sub myths, if you will, as we go through. So this is really designed to be a conversation and hopefully kind of get those questions answered for you, but at the same time kind of reset how we're thinking about this exam and really set you up for success to kind of get things going. And we'll do some MCAT problems along the way. I mean, we can't not do MCAT problems when we're talking about the MCAT. But the first myth that you've probably heard for many years, you hear it from your peers, is that the MCAT is this ultimate weed out exam, right? So it's the one thing. And yes, the MCAT is a very, very important exam, but it's important also to recognize that while it is the number one factor in the admissions process, we do a survey every year of medical school admissions officers, and year after year, the answer comes back that the number one kind of admissions factor that exists is this MCAT score. There are lots of other factors that go into place and go into play with an admissions committee when they're making their ultimate decision. So they're not only looking at your MCAT score. The MCAT score is one part of it. It's a very important part of it. And the reason why it's such an important part is that unlike your GPA, which reflects how you have performed in a very, very specific set of classes at a specific school at a specific time, taught by a specific set of instructors, and even at the same university, especially if you're at a very large institution, you know, you might take intro chemistry and your friend takes intro chemistry, but you have different professors and are held to different standards. That's your GPA. That's what that's reflecting. It's showing how you've performed as a student. The MCAT score actually is designed to show, to predict how you will perform as a medical student. Not the entire prediction, but part of that prediction, part of that, let's see the potential that the student has. And so this is really an exam that is designed to measure that potential. It's not the only thing they're going to use to measure the potential, but that's what it is designed for. And since it is a standardized exam, meaning everybody is being evaluated against the same standard, medical school admissions committees place a high value onto it because it's the one thing that they can say, okay, we're measuring everybody against that same standard. The MCAT score and the GPA are oftentimes referred to as the quantitative factors for admission. And every school does it ever so slightly differently in putting together some kind of formula or some kind of index where they take the GPA, they take the MCAT score, and they rank you into one of 3 spots. There's absolutely deny, meaning, okay, we've seen the grades, we've seen the MCAT scores, chances are the student isn't going to be successful in our program, so we're going to deny them. There's the presumably deny, really the kind of, if there's something major, some extenuating circumstances, something that's extraordinary in the other parts of the application, otherwise we're probably going to deny the student. And then there's presumably admit, meaning the grades are good, the MCAT score is good, we'll probably admit them, but let's go look at the other stuff. What you'll notice though, in this application strength ranking, there's no such thing as an absolute admit, meaning nobody has ever been admitted to medical school purely on MCAT scores, purely on GPAs. In fact, I had a student a couple of years back, who, you know, the story ends well. A student is in medical school or went to medical school, finished medical school, is a practicing physician now, had a 4.0 GPA, 99th percentile MCAT score, and that was about it, right? In fact, it was a triple major, had been awarded the highest honor by the university at graduation, but that was it. That's all the student had. And when they went to apply for medical school, they didn't have anything to talk about because they hadn't really gone through that clinical experience, the research, the life experiences that the medical schools were looking for. So, you know, it took a couple of years and filled in those gaps, really kind of grew as a person outside of the classroom, ended up getting into medical school, and all worked out just fine. That all being said, the second blue box down here, these are the qualitative factors, right? This is really where the school's going to be looking and saying, you know, let's see what else is out there. Now, you know, today's focus is about the MCAT, and the reason why it's important to understand how the whole picture works is you may have phenomenal volunteer experiences or research, you may have a great, you know, story, but if the MCAT score isn't going to compel an admissions officer to say, I want to meet this student, I want to get to know the student even better, I want to see what the professors that the student has had are saying about them, then it's going to be a harder battle. So really treating this exam with the respect that it deserves. And I'm not just saying that because I'm an MCAT guy. I'm saying that because that's the reality of it. You have to treat it with the respect that it deserves and give it the attention that it deserves in terms of your preparation, right? In terms of actually investing time into preparing for this exam. This isn't an exam that you can wake up one morning and say, okay, I'm going to go take the MCAT and I'll just do fine. I've taken my classes. I'm going to go take the exam. Everything's going to work out okay. This is an exam that you do have to have some level of structured preparation, structured study for, so that you are in fact executing the best that you can. And quite frankly, going back to where we started, showing your true potential, right? Really being able to say, this is how well I'm going to be able to perform at your medical institution. So kind of thinking about the bigger picture and understanding how the MCAT score fits into it, I think is an important kind of mindset adjustment that we need to oftentimes be thinking about. The MCAT, and if you have questions, by all means, feed them in because we want to hear them. The MCAT oftentimes, the question does come up, like, why does it exist? I'm not going to give you the full history lesson on why the MCAT exists, but I'll tell you this much. There was a time back in the 1920s when the MCAT didn't exist. Unfortunately, that also meant that about 20% of medical students were failing during their first year because they weren't ready to start medical school. So medical schools got together and said, we need some kind of metric. We need some kind of evaluation. And the exam, of course, looked very different almost 100 years ago, but it served the purpose of, okay, let's see if we can make sure that students are in fact prepared and ready to undertake the education that is required of them. About 12 years later, a study was done, number had dropped down to 10%, so things were good. And today, the number is considerably lower. In fact, the first year failure rates oftentimes are linked to factors outside of, outside of the actual kind of academic work. It's like, life events that have occurred that cause students to not be able to perform in medical school. That all being said, the MCAT is here. It's here to stay. It's important to kind of keep that in mind as you're going through all of this. I see there are a couple of questions that are coming in from the chat that I think are good kind of to talk about right now. There are a couple that we'll talk about later. One of them is what happens as far as low GPA, high MCAT score, or vice versa. Here's what I'll say, and I say this with the intention of you being successful at the end of the day. It's hard to change your GPA, right? I mean, you take a class and you're like, okay, I got an A this time. GPA moves up just ever so slightly, right? It's not a big kind of change, if you will. Relatively speaking, it is easier to move your MCAT score because you can say, okay, I'm going to dedicate about 300 total hours of time to this exam, and I can significantly make improvements. There's a direct correlation between how, not just how much work you do, but the quality of the work that you do and the structure of that work, and making sure that you're actually doing the work that is right for you, that correlates to the improvement that you'll see as far as your scores go. I mean, we have students who come in sometimes thinking that, oh, I'm just going to take a Kaplan course and my score is going to magically appear. No, you have to actually put the work in. What our job is to guide you to make sure that you're doing the work that is right for you. We're all different. We all have different strengths. We all have different weaknesses. You have to focus on those areas of opportunity because that's where your scores are going to improve. As humans, we're creatures of habit. We like to feel good about ourselves. We're going to want to do things that we're good at. But if we've already maxed out the points that are available from those topic areas, then you're not going to be seeing score improvement. So that's where our job comes in. That's how we partner with you. That's how our program works, is to be able to say, okay, let's identify where are those weak areas. Let's get that structured guidance. Let's make sure that you're doing the right type of work. What worked for your friend isn't necessarily going to work for you, right? Because we're all different. We all have those different kind of strengths and weaknesses as we go through this. That all being said, what's actually tested on this thing? And this is probably something that is redundant. You've seen this, but just to make sure that we're leveling the playing field here. As far as the MCAT goes, you need a year's worth of biology with lab, a year's worth of GChem, a year's worth of organic chemistry, depending on what the how it's phrased where you're at, and physics. Okay, so those are the four kind of classic pre-med courses. As far as that's as far as the MCAT goes, you need those areas. As far as applying to medical school, you need those four courses as well, but about 2/3 of medical schools require some kind of writing intensive course, but there's no writing exam on the MCAT. About 20% of schools require calculus. but there's no calculus on the MCAT. So we have this kind of world in which we've got these pre-med requirements, some of which are going to be applicable to the MCAT, some of which are not going to be applicable to the MCAT. And then at the bottom of the screen here, you'll see that biochemistry, psychology, and sociology, those are topics that are tested on the MCAT. But guess what? You are not required to have coursework in those areas. So, if you can teach yourself the biochem that's tested on the MCAT, you're good. I wouldn't recommend it, but you're good, right? So it's important to kind of keep that in mind. The big myth, though, is over here. You hear this from students all the time. They're like, oh, I got to take genetics. I got to take microbiology. I got to take physiology. I got to take anatomy in order to do well in the MCAT or to get into medical school. And the answer is no. You should take classes that are of interest to you. You should take classes that are, appealing maybe to you for something that you want to know about, but never just take a class for the sake of taking a class because you think it'll be good on your med school application. That also being said, yes, if you take molecular biology or an upper division genetics course or an anatomy course or physiology course, they're going to sharpen your scientific skills, and they're going to make you even better at being able to apply the, quote unquote, basic sciences of bio, GChem, OChem, physics. But that all being said, you don't need to necessarily take the classes. So my advice to you, take the classes that you want to take the classes that you're going to enjoy, that you're truly interested in. Medical schools are all going to teach you anatomy on their own. They're going to say, you know what? And in fact, I've heard this from lots of admissions officers, lots of medical school faculty. Only our medical school can teach anatomy the way that we want our students to know anatomy, right? So we're not gonna let you say, oh, I took undergraduate anatomy course. Great, good for you. We're gonna do it again. We're gonna do it in a different way. So really important to kind of keep that in mind as you're thinking through this. That also being said, the MCAT is an exam that you're going to invest a significant amount of time preparing for. It's not an exam you want to be just taking all the time. So, I see a couple questions have come in as far as, how many times do people retake the exam? The ideal world, and I'm being very idealistic here, but the ideal world is you study for it once and you take it once. If things don't quite go as well as you wanted them to go, then yes, you can retake the exam, but don't go into it with the mindset of, oh, I'll just keep retaking this exam, because one, medical schools are going to see all your MCAT scores, and two, medical schools are going to really, want to make sure that if you have retaken the exam, they are seeing some significant amount of improvement, right? So that's the, this is the case there. I will also say that every medical school in the United States requires the MCAT. There are schools that are in Canada and other parts of the world that do not require the MCAT or only look at certain sections of the MCAT score. My advice to you on that end, go to the medical school websites that you're interested in applying to and see what their requirements are, or go to the MSAR, which is the Medical School Admissions Requirements book that's published every year. I call it a book, but it's really digital book, and make sure that you're looking to see what the specifics are for the schools that you're going in, because there's no like formal pre-med prerequisites. Every school gets to set their own, but they all have bio, GChem, OChem, and physics, and guarantee you on that as is the case. That all being said, making sure that you are reviewing the content is going to be absolutely necessary for your success on the MCAT. The MCAT is an exam that requires and assumes, quite frankly, some level of content knowledge. But I want to warn you, that level of content knowledge is a specific set of skills. It is different from the content knowledge that you were learning in your undergraduate classes, which is good news, meaning you're going to learn more in your undergraduate classes. You're going to learn more OChem, you're going to learn more chemistry, you're going to learn more physics in your undergrad classes than you're actually going to be responsible for on the MCAT. So when you're studying for the MCAT, you got to make sure that you're just studying the stuff and focusing on the stuff that you're actually going to be tested on. But just knowing the material, just knowing the information is never going to be enough with this exam. In fact, the MCAT very specifically rewards you not for knowing content. And I want you to write this down, and I want you to never forget this. It does not reward you for knowing content. It rewards you for being able to apply the content. The application of the content is where you are going to see success on the MCAT. So it's not just about rereading the chem and memorizing the formulas. It's, can I actually apply this? And specifically, can I apply this to new situations, to new scenarios that I've never been presented with before? can I take the science knowledge that I have, and you can I be able to apply that in the manner of time that has been given to me? Can I, in the amount of time that's been given to me, can I, in fact, be able to do that? That is one of the core skill sets that you're going to have to be focusing on, which leads us to myth number 2, which is that the MCAT is primarily a science exam. And that is not true, right? There is no truth to that. One, there is an entire section that, in fact, has no science on it. So the CARS section has the critical analysis and reasoning skills section, that has no science on it. But more importantly, the other 3 sections, which require science content knowledge, they're not rewarding you just for knowing the content. They're rewarding you for being able to apply the content. So in fact, when you look at the MCAT, there actually are 4, and these are the science skills. There are 4 scientific skills that are tested in every question. So scientific reasoning, experimental design, knowledge and the application of that knowledge, and the data and statistical skills. So every question is going to have at least one of these skills, and they're going to combine that with content areas as you're going through. So it's that intersection of the 2 that you're really going to find that success. We added this 5th one, the MCAT test expertise. Very simply put, the better you know how to play any game, whether it's game night on Zoom these days, right? Because of everything that's going on, or a sport, whatever it might be, the better you know how to play the game, the better you're going to perform at it. If you think about the MCAT as a game, you say, okay, the better I know the rules, the better I know how the test is actually going to frame questions, how are they going to introduce trap answers on those questions, the better I can be at doing well at the game. You're not trying to beat down the game, you're trying to get the maximum number of points, right? You want to get as many points as you possibly can. And I say this jokingly, but there's a truth to it. The easiest way to raise your MCAT score is to get more questions right. So how do we get more questions right? But here's the fun part of all this. When we think about the MCAT as being this critical thinking, this reasoning exam, it really actually has a strong parallel to the profession that you're about to enter. And so this is where the MCAT actually ties into everything that you've seen so far today and everything you're going to see later on today. And that is, if you think about kind of your typical doctor appointment, your typical patient-doctor interaction. Patient goes to the doctor because the patient is presenting some kind of symptoms that they've never seen before, right? Or that are new to them, or maybe it's an ongoing condition, but they're presenting some kind of symptoms. Physician walks into the exam room, and when the physician walks into the exam room, she walks into the exam room with a lot of content knowledge, right? With a lot of experience, with having seen cases through the years, with having read material, reading literature, right? So that's what the physician is walking into the room with. All that knowledge, all that experience isn't really worth much unless they're able to apply that information and apply that to the patient that's in front of them, right? It's like saying, yes, I know the answer, but they're not telling anybody what it is. So the physician walks in with all that knowledge, the patient presents these kind of new symptoms, presents the puzzle, if you will, and it's the doctor's responsibility, the physician's responsibility, to take their content knowledge, to take the information that they're gathering from the patient, put the 2 together, and reason out a diagnosis. And the diagnosis is going to be either a course of action in terms of medication or change in lifestyle, whatever it may be. That's a direct parallel to the MCAT. You walk into the MCAT with content knowledge. You walk into the MCAT with the science skills. The MCAT presents you with passages and with questions about information that you haven't seen before, but you have all the tools in your tool belt to be able to answer that question. But if you can't actually take that content knowledge and apply it with critical thinking skills, then you're not going to be able to reason out an answer choice, which is the diagnosis. It's the parallel to the diagnosis. So part of your training, part of your preparation for this exam is not only going to be about the content, it's going to be about you being able to really, really, really build up and strengthen and just be perfectly in tune as far as those critical thinking skills are concerned. And so in our programs, and this is kind of how we think about the MCAT, it's a multifaceted approach, right? There's the content that's going to be reviewed. There's the critical thinking skills that are going to be built. There's the practice that's going to happen as far as questions, and then longer sets of questions, and then full-length exams, which will actually build your endurance, because maybe you can perform on a couple questions, but now you got to perform for 7.5 hours because it's a very, very long day as far as this exam is concerned. So all these things have to be considered as you're looking through this, because the MCAT doesn't actually test you like your science professors tested you, which is myth number 3 here. So, if you've got questions about anything we've been talking about, by all means, just keep bringing them in. But you think about this, you say, okay, well, how is this test actually different? You think about your physics professor or your orgo professor. They taught you the material because they want you to learn it like a physicist or like an organic chemist or like a general chemist. Get to the MCAT, and all of a sudden, everything is mixed together. And this is where it gets interesting. If you look at just the titles of the sections, you've got the chemical and physical foundations of biological systems. You've got the words chemistry, you've got the words physics, and you've got biology all rolled into one section, which means all of a sudden, those isolated subjects that you have learned, those isolated subjects that you have reviewed, that you've practiced with, now you have to start thinking about how they actually interconnect with each other. This is what's absolutely fascinating about this exam, and draws another parallel to the human body and to medicine, is that the human body is all connected. You think about the circulatory system. Circulatory system, we learn about that traditionally in a biology class because it is a biological system. But in fact, there's a ton of fluid dynamics and a ton of physics that's involved in the circulatory system. Not to trivialize the circulatory system, but at the end of the day, it's a pump, which happens to be a biological pump, right? It's membranes that are pumping, but it's a pump, just like if you had a mechanical pump, that's connected to a number of tubes, right? Those tubes happen to be arteries and capillaries and veins, and it is pushing fluid throughout that system. And you're going to have changes in pressure. You're going to have changes in velocity that are going to occur as a result of the changes in the cross-sectional area of those tubes. So you start to think about this and say, okay, now it's not just about knowing the science, it's about knowing how to actually connect all the sciences, to connect all the topics, and to bring everything together. And so this is where, as part of your training, you have to, again, second mind shift that has to come to play here, is that every section is going to have integration of this content. It's all going to be connected along the way. And so it's going to be important for you to stop thinking about the sciences as individual sciences and start thinking about the sciences and how they're connected. I mean, redox is a perfect example of that, right? Oxidation reduction occurs in biological systems. It occurs in physical systems. It occurs in chemical systems, right? It's in all the places. It's all the same thing. It's all electrons being moved, being either gained or being lost, whether you're looking at it in the electron transport chain or you're looking at it in an electrochemical cell, right? It's all the same thing, but we just have learned it individually, and now we have to start thinking about it collectively. As you can see from this kind of breakdown that's on the screen here, the content is not only tested in any one section. I mean, biochemistry is equally tested in the Chem Phys and in the biochem section. So again, we have to say, oh, wait a minute, I thought that would only be in one of the places. No, it's going to be in multiple places. Bio is in all 3 of the science sections. Same with GChem, it's in 2 of them, and organic chemistry is in a little bit of each. So you're going to see these things all throughout. A submyth, if you'll indulge me, is, and maybe you've heard this, you hear that rumor that, oh, there's not actually a lot of OChem on the MCAT. Kind of true, kind of not true. So there is OChem that's tested on the MCAT directly. And as a result of that, we say, okay, well, we need to know OChem. But there isn't as much OChem tested directly as there is biochemistry. And so that's why the notion comes into play that, oh, we don't actually need organic chemistry. But here's a little insider tip for you. Organic chemistry is the foundation of all biochemistry. So yes, you may not directly be tested on organic chemistry, but you are being tested on OChem, just in another way. Again, back to this notion of integration and this kind of connection of the dots as you're moving through this. So think about that, kind of, adjust yourselves, and also prepare yourselves for the length of this exam. I mean, this is not a short exam. This is a 7.5-hour day. There's a lunch break that's halfway through this exam. Yes, there are breaks in between all the sections, but there's a longer break right smack dab in the middle. And we're not used to taking 7.5-hour exams. I don't know about you, but I'm not used to taking 7.5-hour exams. I think by longest exam I've ever taken was 4 hours. So, it's not in school, right? So like, it's not a kind of normal thing to be sitting down for 7.5 hours to take an exam. Then all of a sudden the MCAT rolls around, you're like, oh, okay, 7.5 hour exam. You got to get yourself ready for the endurance factor. You got to be as fresh at the end of it as you are at the beginning of it. And it's just so important to make sure that that's part of your plan. Part of that plan of being fresh is to actually have an attack strategy, right? You don't want to go into things just say, okay, I'm going to figure it out along the way. No, you want to go in saying, how am I going to actually succeed on this? How am I going to go targeted in on this and make sure that I am doing this the way that I want to be doing this? And so this brings us to, and as Jed alluded to, as I alluded to, it's impossible, unfortunately, for us to kind of do everything in an hour's time as far as the MCAT, but I can give you a little bit of a preview of how this all works. And so this is the question strategy that we have here. We call it type, rephrase, investigate, and match. And the words are relatively self-explanatory. The first thing you want to be doing is saying, okay, what kind of question type is this? Is this a question that I want to be doing now? Is it one that I want to be doing later? Is it easy? Is it hard for me? What's the topic area? What's it going to require of me? Every question on the MCAT counts the same. So if there's a question that you're like, yeah, I know how to answer that. It's a KSP problem, but it's going to take me, many, many steps in order to be able to get to the answer. Maybe it's wise to go do other questions. The second part, this rephrasing part, really is about getting to the core of what the question is asking. I'll show you this in a second, where there's sometimes a lot of like excess fluff that's in these questions. You don't actually need. You just need to know, okay, what's the real question that you want to know? Like, what are you really asking here? Sometimes like when your friends are trying to find something out and they're asking you like 50 million different questions and you say, hey, just what do you really want? What do you really want to know? Just tell me and I'll tell you. So that's the rephrasing part where you say, okay, how can I make this happen? How can I make this work the way that is going to be most efficient for me? Then there's the investigative portion. It's kind of where you put your Sherlock Holmes hat on, right? And you say, okay, how can I, in fact, use the knowledge that I have, use the information that I have from the test itself to be able to actually work towards an answer? And I like to use an analogy here that maybe isn't as relatable these days, or at least the last year or so, because we probably haven't spent as much time at the grocery stores as we normally would. But I'll tell you this much. So there are two ways to go grocery shopping. There's the right way and there's the wrong way. The right way is you grab a list and you check everything off the list and you get home and you have everything you need and you don't have anything you don't need. Then there's the way that I go grocery shopping, which is I grab a cart, and maybe you've done this as well, or you've seen your friends or your family do this, where you grab a cart and you snake up and down the aisles. Anyone do this? Yes, I see a couple, right? So we do this and we grab stuff off the shelves, and inevitably we get home and we have forgotten something, or we bought something that we didn't actually need because we already have plenty of it at home. When you're looking at the MCAT, you want to go into the 4 answer choices looking for something specifically, like you go into the grocery store with your list and you're looking for specific items. You want to be going into the answer choices looking for something, as opposed to reading through all the answer choices and finding one that kind of works. Because I can assure you, like the grocery store puts those kind of trap, buy 2, get 3 for free coupons out there, or, savings out there. You're going to fall into a trap, and you don't want to fall into a trap. So you want to go into the answer choices actively looking for something rather than letting something find you. Once you've done that, then it's the easy part, which is the 4th part, which is to actually make a match. Where does my prediction, which answer choice does it actually match up with? So let's take a look and see how we can put this in the plan. We've put all the kind of notes on the side here so you can get a feel of how this works. But I don't want you to treat this question as like, okay, I got to get this one right. I want you to kind of listen to this process. Let's see how this actually plays out. Question says, if the bond between 2 phosphate groups in ATP is 9 times 10 to the negative 11 meters, by how much would the electrical potential energy change if the bond length were 3 times shorter? We say, okay, they're asking about ATP. And the reality is they're not asking about ATP. In fact, it doesn't matter that it's 2 phosphate groups. All that it matters is that it's 2 of the same thing, right? Phosphate groups happen to both be negatively charged, but it doesn't matter. It just matters that, okay, they're both the same exact charge, right? So similar charges, of course, are going to repel each other. So we're like, okay, that's great. They're the same charge. The distance that they gave us, this 9 times 10 to the negative 11, here's a little top tip for you. If you look at the answer choices, there's no precise value that you're going to have to come up with. The answer choices are all about the relationships, right? The first two say it would decrease. The second two say it would increase. And then it's a factor of 3 or a factor of 9. So really, this is an electric potential energy question. So it's a physics question. That is the physics that is going to be applied to the biological system, right? Or to a biological molecule, really, in this case. So if you rephrase this, you say to yourself, okay, well, if the bond length is 3 times shorter, what's going to end up happening to the electrical potential energy? And this is where we look and say, okay, well, we've got our formula over here, right? We've got the formula in terms of the electrical potential energy is K times Q1, Q2 divided by the distance R. This is a formula that you would have memorized, right? You would have go into the test knowing it, but if you don't know it right now, no problem. Now you know it. Since Q1 and Q2 are the same, we're good there, right? We don't have to worry about the actual value of what Q1 and Q2 are. All we have to do is say, well, what would happen is if this radius, this distance, was 1/3, right? It was 3 times shorter. So it's 1/3 the original length. We say, okay, well, we look here, we do manipulation as far as the formula goes. We end up with, well, the new electrical potential energy would be 3 times K Q1 Q2 over R. So it's 3 times what the original electrical potential energy is. So we know that it's gone up, so we can eliminate out answer choices 1 and 2. And more importantly, we know that it has, in fact, gone up by a factor of 3. So we're at answer choice number 3, right? The third answer choice is the answer choice that we're going to have here at the end of the day. So that's the thought process, right? That's the thought process. How can I take this relatively simple formula and how can I kind of walk myself through, glean the information out, extract the information that I don't actually need to be able to make the prediction and find the match in the answer choices. Speaking of extra information, leads us to this next question, which is something that you're probably familiar with, is my guess, right? My gut tells me, from my experience, from all the students I've had, you probably know this fact. You probably know the fact that the sodium-potassium pump is an ATPase that pumps 3 sodium out of the cell and 2 potassium into the cell for every ATP that's hydrolyzed. And the reason why I know you probably know that fact is that the sodium-potassium pump is the most commonly used example of active transport in introductory bio classes, period, full stop, right? You've learned this like probably in high school, right? You learned this on day 1. It's 3 out, 2 in, net movement of 1 outwards. Here's the deal though. If they've given you that information, this is how the MCAT operates. If they've given you that information, can they actually reward you for that information? And the answer is simple. They can't, because they've told everyone that information. So they're not going to reward you for that. If anything, they've said, even if you didn't know this, we're telling you this information now. So what we really care about is for you to be able to apply this content knowledge. That's where that application comes into play. Second sentence tells us that the cells can use the pump to help maintain cell volume. We say, okay, still haven't asked us a question. They've given us more information. Maybe we didn't know that, but now we do. So they're not going to reward us on it. So we go to the third sentence. Which of the following will most likely happen to the rate of ATP consumption immediately after a cell is moved to a hypotonic environment? Now our thinking caps go off and we say hypotonic. What does that mean? Well, hypotonic means that you have a low concentration of solute. You recall that information. This is literally the thought process that is going on in your head in under a minute's amount of time, because this question didn't have a passage attached to it. This was just a straight, what's called a discrete question. Look at it, here it is, and we're going to answer it. So we say, okay, hypotonic, low concentration of solute, perfect. There's a low concentration of solute in the environment. That means there's a high concentration of water. The water is going to go into the cell. So the cell is going to start to swell up, right? It's going to get bigger. So we say, who can come and save the day to keep the cell's volume the same? Sodium-potassium pump. Sodium-potassium pump ramps up its ATP consumption. It's pumping 3 sodium out, pumping 2 potassium in for a net movement of 1 ion out into the environment. So we have an increase as far as the consumption of ATP. Once we get to a point, however, that we are in an isotonic state, where the concentration of solutes in the environment are the same as the concentration of solutes inside the cell, in theory, we're going to drop back down. But here's the fun part. That's our prediction if we didn't pay attention to the question that was actually being asked. There is one very, very important key word in the question, and you can miss it if you don't pay close attention to it, and that is the word immediately. That's the word that matters. They don't care, or rather they're not asking you what will eventually happen. They are asking you what will immediately happen after the cells move to the hypotonic environment. And what immediately will happen is that you will see an increase as far as that ATP consumption is concerned. So really this is about not just knowing the content, not just being able to apply the content, but sometimes it's also about making sure that you're actually answering the question that was being asked of you. Because I can assure you, they will put that trap answer choice of increase then decrease, which is factually true. That eventually will happen. At some point in time, it will go up and then it will go back down. But as far as what they cared about, as far as what they were actually holding you accountable for, what they're going to reward you for, as far as points go, is really making sure that you understood what they were asking you, understood that what hypotonic means, and were able to use this information here in the actual question to be able to get to that answer, even if you knew that information beforehand. That's how the MCAT works. That's how the MCAT, like the real kind of behind the scenes, how this exam is designed and how it's doing all these things that we talk about. We say critical thinking. Well, what does that mean? It's that thought process that we just went into. But what you have to train yourself on is to be able to do all that and to be able to do that in the amount of time and do it under, quite frankly, a very stressful situation in which nerves could start to play a factor. So the more you prepare, the better you're going to be as you go through this. Part of that preparation is making sure that you are focusing in the right areas. So this fourth myth very naturally follows those questions in that it's so easy to want to study everything. I had a student a couple of years back, it was like 2 or 3 days before the exam, sends me an email, panic email, Petros, alpha beta decay, never learned it. Can we meet for 30 minutes? I was like, sure, we can meet for 30 minutes. Your test is in 2 days. We're not going to talk about alpha and beta decay because it's super low yield as far as content is concerned. She was thinking, I got to learn everything. And she ended up getting no questions about alpha and beta decay. So she had that classic, freak out moment of, oh no, I saw something that I don't know. I better go and grab all of my time and put all my attention to it. No, you have to make sure that you're doing the work that you need to be doing. There are certain areas of this exam or certain content areas that are higher yield. Okay, so that's where we come in. We're able to say, okay, there's a very large team of my colleagues and teammates and friends that we love looking at this stuff and really nerding out about the MCAT. That's our job. We've taken care of that for you. So you don't have to do it, but really kind of figuring out what is it that's actually going to be the higher yield topics and making sure that you are putting the right focus on it. And we identify those and we point you in those right directions. The beauty of kind of making sure that you are doing this correctly is about making sure that you're getting that right guidance, right? Making sure that you are looking and saying, okay, I'm going to do the work that is necessary for me to be doing, right? Making sure that I'm not just studying everything because I think I'm supposed to be studying everything, which goes back to this whole notion of that every pre-med needs the same kind of one size fits all MCAT prep. There's plenty of theories out there, plenty of posts that have been put up through the years of here's how I scored in the 95th percentile. I studied for 5 hours a day for 20 days, standing on my head. Great, that worked for that person. That doesn't mean it's going to work for you. And it's so easy to fall into the traps. You probably agree with me on this, I'm assuming, right? It's so easy to go down the rabbit hole and want to read everything. Oh, I'm going to go and I'm just going to go do what this person did. No, you got to do what's right for you, right? There's nothing wrong. And I say this with a good heart. There's nothing wrong with being a little selfish through this process, right? It's so easy to want to just do what you think you should be doing. No, you need to do what is right for you, not what everybody else is doing, because it's your MCAT score and it's your time and it's your studying that's really going to come into play, which leads us back to this notion, as far as the integration of the exam, it's really important to make sure that you're not just looking at this breakdown and saying, this is how much I'm going to study. It's you looking at this breakdown and saying, okay, where are my biggest opportunities? So for instance, if you're really good at thermodynamics, I love thermodynamics. I could do thermodynamics problems all day if I wanted to, if I had time to. I'm not going to improve my MCAT score by just doing more thermodynamics problems, because I'm going to get all those right? And so if you're in that boat, you're like, hey, I'm really good at this one thing and I want to keep doing more of that thing because I'm going to feel really good about myself. That's not going to be improving your score. So it's really important to be, dare I say, critical of yourself and open to and saying, okay, let me see where it is that my true kind of areas of opportunity are going to be. I don't like calling them weaknesses because they're not weaknesses. They're just, okay, I haven't spent the time on those areas and I'm going to go spend the time on those areas as I move forward. So making sure that you're able to kind of get that exposure. We have a system. So if you decide to take a Kaplan course, you'll see this. It's the only one out there that actually analyzes all of your questions. It analyzes your performance and makes recommendations to you that says, hey, Petros, you're horrible at mechanical physics. Like, go do these problems, right? Go do these, go watch these videos, go do this, which leads me to actually, the next point. There are lots of ways to learn things, right? I showed you pictures of the books earlier. Some people are, they're like, read something and boom, it's good. Sometimes you need to see it, right? Sometimes you need to say, okay, I need to actually see somebody teach it to me live. I need to see a quick recording of it. I need to do some practice problems with it. We have all those tools, right? So all those tools are kind of built in. This is a screenshot from the online study plan, just to kind of give you a sense of how things are structured. Everything is laid out for you, but at the same time, you'll see this recommended for you. These recommendations are literally customized to you. Like, go do this thing here, and this is what's going to get you to where you want to be getting to. I alluded to this earlier. There's obviously the live component of your class, but there are also times where you're like, look, I've seen a quick review on Pascal's principle. I need a quick review on buoyancy. I need a quick review on this. So we have these science review videos that literally you just like click on it. 5 minutes later, you're good on Pascal's principle, and you visually have seen it, right? You actually see it happening in front of you as opposed to just reading it. But some folks are going to say that works for me. Some folks are going to say, I want to just read what's in the book. It's going to depend on what works for you. This goes back to that customization, and that really the customization to what your individual needs are going to ultimately be. The MCAT channel, which is part of the course and part of your overall experience, really is where you get the dedicated both content review and practice and critical thinking organized by individual topics. So there are about 100 or so hours of different sessions. So each session is 1 hour. There's a relatively small team of teachers who teach on the MCAT channel, so both on cam and off cam. And what our job is to make sure that you are, you're covered off and you're getting that kind of focused attention time in these various topic areas. So when you think about how the Kaplan course works, I saw there were a couple of questions that have come in about our program. So I will just kind of show you how this works. The way that our program is designed, you saw the online study plan. Online study plan is, in a way, the roadmap that is changing, right? It's the GPS system that's saying, oh, there's a accident over here, so actually take this route instead. That's your recommendation to go in another direction. At the same time, there's a live teaching component. There's a core set of classes that everybody goes to, right? So we say, okay, we want everybody to go to this, but we're not going to force everybody to sit through like 130 hours of class, because your time needs to be spent in the right places. Back to that niche, the notion of the customization, the personalization to what your individual needs are. So then there's the MCAT channel, which fills that role of saying, okay, I need to go work on the endocrine system, so I'm showing up to see Tyler's session about the endocrine system at 7 o'clock. The MCAT channel sessions run live, and they run every single day. We take Fridays off, so they run every single day. And there's a different session, so you kind of see what the schedule is coming up and plan accordingly to make sure that you're covering on all the material as you go through. As part of pre-med day, as part of registration week, quite frankly, we have this opportunity, which is to get access to your MCAT, to the MCAT program for an unlimited amount of time through September 2021. So basically, you decide now to take a course, but you don't have to figure out actually when you're going to be testing. Things are a little bit different this year as far as the test is concerned. So this all access gives you that opportunity to really say, okay, I'm just going to get access to the Kaplan materials, and it's going to be unlimited through the entirety of the 2021 testing year. Plus, there's this nice little promo code that you can use, which will save you a little bit of money along the way. That all being said, we also know there are lots of different options, right? And because there are lots of different students, sometimes you need to work with somebody individually. Sometimes you want to just do it on your own. So we have a do-it-yourself course or a self-study course. Sometimes you're like, nope, I want that accountability. I want a schedule. I want to know when I'm going to class, who's going to be teaching me. And that's where the online course comes into play. So all of these have the MCAT channel, but it just depends on kind of what the modality is going to be for you. Here's the thing. It's very easy to look at a screen slide here and say, okay, these are the 4 different options. But the reality is we're all so different that we actually, know that, obviously. And we have a team of teachers who will talk to you about it. So you can book time with them and kind of walk you through what the right plan is for you, right? Maybe for some of you, the right plan might not be one of these 4 options, maybe one of the other options that we have. We want to make sure that you're doing the right things, not just doing something because you think you need to be doing it. If you need the boot camp, which is literally the most intensive, uninterrupted MCAT prep you're going to have, it's 5 straight weeks, fully structured, then that's right for you, then that's right for you. But we're gonna help you figure that out, is what it comes down to. So, take good measure into thinking through how you're going to want to be preparing, for this exam, and how you want to be kind of structuring your time as it goes through. There was a good question that came in about if it's too early, and I wanted to just address this. If it's too early to start studying for the MCAT, and is it possible to start studying too early? The answer to that is kind of yes and no. In a weird way, you've started studying for the MCAT from the first day when you took your pre-med courses, right? Your first pre-med course, you started studying for the MCAT. That was and I got really blurry all of a sudden there. That's when you started. So yes, in a way, you can start early. As far as your MCAT prep in earnest, which is you reviewing material, you starting to actually do practice problems, et cetera, it isn't necessarily ever too early to be thinking about it and making sure that you are integrating how certain topics are going to be tested on the MCAT in the future, especially if you're taking general chemistry or taking physics or whatever it is. How great would it be to, as you're going through the course, to be able to say, oh yeah, I'm going to be tested on that on the MCAT. So I'm going to pay extra special attention. I'm going to, bookmark that, and I'm going to come back to that later, so that I know that I'm going to be prepared for this as we go through. That all being said, you should take those steps, and you should be taking those steps, and you can use the blueprint of the MCAT to kind of guide you along the way. And we have plenty of information available on our website as well, of course. But as far as studying for the MCAT itself, unfortunately, sometimes, yes, there's a very easy way to burn yourself out. And I want you to be careful about that. If you start 2 years ahead of time taking full-length exams and doing all this work, and you're not going to be taking the tests for 18 months, you will start to experience burnout. Generally speaking, we recommend that students start about 4 to 5 months before you're planning on actually taking the exam. So if you're gonna, it's February now, so ideally speaking, you would be testing in July. Maybe you need to test a little sooner than that. That's fine, or even May, right? But it's really about being able to say, okay, how am I going to fit about 300 to 350 total hours into my schedule, and make sure that that time is not just built in, but it's structured, and I'm getting my maximum efficiency, right? It's not about the number of hours you put in. It's about the quality of the number of hours that you put in. So, don't go into this like, oh, I've read for 300 hours scientific journals, I'm good for the MCAT. No, it's like, how did you actually spend that time as you were going through this? So be very, very conscious about that as you're looking through this, and we'll help you kind of figure it out as you go. Which leads us to myth number 6, which is why why I was alluding to that. As far as being too early to start preparing for the MCAT, this is kind of your typical med school admissions timeline. So, if you think about it, we're here right now. So as I said, kind of July is the time to be looking. The reason why you'll see these blue ideals, if you will, ideal timelines, is this is when the primary applications opens, when the secondaries opens, when interviews start. And of course, it's a rolling process. Medical school admissions, for the most part, is a rolling process, meaning as they receive applications, they make decisions, or they move the application along, I should say. Part of that is that they need an MCAT score in order to make that happen. So generally speaking, you're going to want to start studying for the MCAT about 5, maybe even 6 months at a time. But it's all about the pacing, and it's all about the structure that you're going to be putting into it. Some of you might be thinking, I'm assuming, to study for the MCAT over the summer, which is a great time to study, especially if you're not taking classes, you're not working, or maybe you got a part-time job. It's not as time consuming. Like, that's a great time to take the MCAT, to study for the MCAT, because you have a little bit more mind space along the way. I will say, don't try to study for the MCAT and take too many science classes at the same time, because you're going to be very, very tired from all the cases. There was a question about applying early and why that's important. Bottom line is, the medical schools have a certain number of seats, and they have a standard that they've been doing this for years. They know what their previous class profiles look like. So they have a profile of a student, not as far as, where the student is from, but as far as like the types of qualities and characteristics that they know are going to be successful in their school. Their goal is to fill those seats with the best people that they can find. And quite frankly, their goal is to fill those seats and make sure that they don't have any empty seats by the time the application process closes. So the reason why a lot of students will apply earlier is because at that point, all the seats are open. It's not a trap. It's not like, oh, they're looking through more applications early on than they are later on. It's about an even stream as far as their rate of review as far as these schools are concerned. And they're experts in their fields. They've done this so many times that they know what they're looking for. So if you can, always advantageous to be earlier in line than later. I'll give you one fun little story. This is another student of mine from a couple of years back. He applied to 12 medical schools. Great MCAT score, great GPA, great life story, great everything. Horrible as far as procrastination goes. Rather, he was very good at procrastinating. He was the best procrastinator I've ever met. He applied to every single school on the final deadline. He got rejected at 11. He got interviewed at 1 and put on the wait list ultimately. By the time he was called to tell him there was a spot for him in May, he had already decided that he was going to reapply to the other 11 schools that he hadn't gotten an interview, but do it early. Did not retake his MCAT score, did not take any more classes, just continued doing the job that he had been doing, was admitted to all 11 the second time around. So, that's one story, but it's not a isolated incident. The ability to be able to kind of put yourself at that best advantage will always be great. That all being said, do not feel pressured. And this is the thing I want you to remember. Do not feel pressured to apply early for the sake of applying early. You should apply when your application is the best representation of you. If that means it has to be pushed back a little bit later on, that's fine. The med schools they want to see the best representation of you. Don't rush an application just because you think, I want to get it in early. I've seen that mistake happen too many times in my years. So don't let that be you. Make sure that you are putting your best foot forward as you move through this. So that all being said, in an hour's time, we've covered 6 myths. We've covered 6 different areas to consider and seen kind of how the MCAT is fitting into all of these things and how all these pieces really are coming together. So, take that with you as you carry forward into the sessions later on today. Take that with you as far as, what you're doing as far as the work is concerned over the next couple of weeks and months. But that all being said, on behalf of the entire Kaplan faculty and the teaching team here and the whole Kaplan family, I do hope our paths cross again but I do wish you each the best of success on the way to getting that white coat. And I look forward to hearing the success stories one day from you as you move forward. Thanks all.
Thank you, Petros. Petros, as one of our channel teachers, is going to be your teacher when you sign up for a class. So he's one of the people that you will get, and he means it when he says that he wants you to stay in touch and tell him how you do on your test, right? That's why we do what we do. That's the best part of being a teacher, is seeing your students succeed and struggling with them to get there. So thanks so much, Petros, for your time. We have another great teacher coming to us with a message. Brandon McKenzie's got a message for you. So we'll see you on the other side of this short break.